be able to talk about my more recent researches and recent fieldwork experience this past summer and fall. I guess like any good folklorist, which is sort of my disciplinary background, and especially as a folklorist who's been sort of trained in the ethnography of performance and communication, I must begin with a disclaimer of my performance and just sort of apologize and say this is very much work in progress, and that that I have more questions than answers at the moment, but hopefully maybe other people's questions can spur me to find some of those answers. So thank you for helping me think through these things as we go. So to start, this summer and fall, I basically set myself up in Yushu Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture in Qinghai Province. So sorry, this pink area is called Yushu City. In the yellow is Yushu Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. Let's see, where am I? Oh, there we go. In the the light gray is Qinghai Province in the entirety of China. Eagle-eyed people from China will notice that there are some missing dots and islands and lines and things, but this is a map selected for convenience, and so we'll just please forgive and all that. So I was in Yushu, and Yushu is sort of this. By the way, lots of pictures today. Distract you from the lack of content. The Yushu is a town in the ethno-linguistic subregion of Tibet that Tibetans call Kham. It is sort of an important, historically, it's an important trading point on the way to Lhasa, and was also sort of between China and Lhasa. It was sort of famed for a princess one time coming through the town, also on her way to becoming the bride of the king of Tibet. Long ancient times. It is associated with the Tibetan epic, and that's sort of the figure we have on in the big statue here in the center of town, and overlooked by this beautiful monastery called Jyanak Monastery. Here's sort of a reverse angle of the village. It's known for its vibrant culture around the Gesar epic, including both inspired bards who tell this is the longest epic in the world, continues to be recited by inspired bards today. They have opera performance of the epic. It's known for horse races and known for just sort of very a sort of a pugnacious and sort of bellicose culture. Now, a little bit outside of Jika, the prefectural seat of Yushu Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, there is a town called Sunze. And Sunze is home to Jyanak Mani. So it's about 5 kilometers outside. It's home to Jyanak Mani. Jyanak Mani is the largest pile of holy stones in the world, supposedly. How that is assessed, anybody's guess. But it is recognized by a Guinness. There's sort of the Guinness Book of World Records, and then there's a Shanghai Guinness, and I think they're the ones who have recognized it as the largest in the world. But it is this massive pile of holy stones in this village about 7 kilometers outside of Jika Township or Yushu City, sort of the seat. Every day from morning till night, people will be walking around, young and old, will walk around this pile as part of their religious practice on a daily basis. On the outskirts of the pile, you will see people, what you see sort of here along the side, you'll see people selling different wares, including stones, and people carve stones. And so when you, to add to the pile, and this is part of the sort of religious and economic life of the village. But when I was there this summer, I noticed that there were a number of changes to the pile, and I've been going to this Moneystone pile for 12 years now. And over the years, I've noticed it sort of gradually changing, and this year was no different. And sort of it's the reflections on these changes as part of my project on cultural sustainability that I'm going to be sort of thinking about today. So I'm going to begin with a brief description of approaches to heritage and cultural sustainability. Just really brief sort of theoretical background. Um, it's going to be way too short, and apologies in advance. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of carving and worship at Jyanak Mani, and the cultural logic of Mani stones, sort of contextualize it, like what ideas does the carving and worship of these stones, or worship is, or the use of these stones as part of ritual, or as part of religious practice, let's say. Worship is maybe brings up too many connotations I don't like. So let's say the cultural logic of these stones and how why people use them as part of their religious practice, and then how that encourages us to complicate ideas of cultural sustainability and cultural heritage. So, approaches to heritage and sustainability. Um, in 2003, UNESCO sort of began what was called the Convention on the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. I'm hopefully only going to say that once because it's a mouthful. Um, and so they did the convention in 2003. In 2006, it came into effect. China, and I have the wrong date here, I think it was 2004 when they ratified it. China is one of the earliest members to ratify the convention. They were, I think, the fifth or the sixth nation to do so, um, and have since become basically one of the most important member states of it. And really, sort of, as one of my PhD students recently pointed out in one of her writings, that China is actively working to sort of shape the standards, the global standards in of the convention and in the implementation of the convention. China really gives a lot of effort to the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. In 2011, they implemented a national law for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, and this work continues to go. And they've created a four-part system where there's county level heritage, county, prefecture, provincial, and national level heritage. And then national level heritage, things that are designated at the national level can also be submitted for consideration at the UNESCO level. And so they create these lists. You have a whole subset of people who are working to identify heritage and make sure it is listed and do the work of safeguarding traditions that are so identified or so designated. But despite this tremendous work, and I mean, to be honest, and that same PhD student, I don't know if she's here today, so, but that same PhD student also included an interesting tidbit that said something like 47% of the traditions that are recognized at the national level in China are related to ethnic minority traditions in China, so which make up about 10% of the population. So ethnic minority traditions are well outrepresented relative to the broader population, which is an interesting little tidbit. Um, so just about as soon as this project began of intangible cultural heritage safeguarding, critiques followed. And two of the major critiques that I'm building off of are Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett, who sort of notices that resources tend to pool at the metacultural level, which means that basically you have these professionals whose job it is to do the work of identifying and safeguarding heritage, and a lot of the money stays there instead of going directly to the stakeholders who keep traditions alive. And the other is that it pits stakeholders against each other. And this is one of my mentors, Dorothy Noyes, wrote that heritage pits stakeholders against each other. And in doing so, it hurts communities that have traditionally actually been the source of traditions. It privileges individual stakeholders at the moment of identification. So the people who have the skills and the connections to ensure heritage for themselves, where maybe a tradition was practiced by an entire community, they get official recognition for a few people. And so, and in doing so, it actually hurts the vitality of many traditions. And this has led a number of scholars to start looking, instead of heritage, instead of thinking about that, they're thinking about cultural sustainability. And it begins with this concept of music sustainability. It begins with this guy, Jeff Todd Titan, who's an ethnomusicologist, um, emeritus professor at Brown, I believe, at this point. And his idea was basically that you needed to have sort of, or one of his early ideas was that it was to treat music sustainability as an ecosystem, and or music cultures as an ecosystem. And so he riffs on the classic definition of sustainability, um, and he defines music sustainability as a music culture's ability to maintain and develop itself in the present and the future. And based on that, he takes this sort of this uh, ecosystem, this music sustainability metaphor further, and sort of says, well, what you need to do is you need to try and promote diversity, interrelatedness, limits to growth, and adaptive management. And I mean, these are sort of classic things, to my understanding, from the space um, of sort of ecosystem maintenance literature and ecological resilience. And so he's sort of suggesting that we need similar things for music sustainability. Shortly following this, you also had another set of ethnomusicologists who tried to think about, okay, well, how do we look at individual music cultures as part of a broader ecosystem or as part of this broader world? And so instead of identifying an individual tradition and trying to safeguard it on its own, trying to look at vitality through what they created a 5-domain approach. So they looked at different traditions based on systems of teaching and learning, looking at relationships between musicians and communities and how these have changed, contexts and constructs. These could include, for example, religious ideas about whether or not, so if a community stops practicing their native religion and starts practicing Christianity, how does that affect ideas about a certain tradition, which may be related to shamanism or something like that. Um, Also, they look at regulations and infrastructure, how governments potentially either promote or can sometimes suppress expressions of different traditions, and then they look at the relationships between musics and industries. But this is still a both of these are still sort of limited to music and limited to individual traditions, is sort of the critique that I'm building out here. Folklorists have then moved on to try and think cultural sustainability more broad, looking beyond just music sustainabilities to looking at sort of culturally and looking at sort of cultural ecosystems. The public folklorist Robert Barron talks about whole of culture strategies that need brokers and resources to sort of support the continued vitality of traditions. And he talks about requiring specific strategies to deal with endangerment and foster resilience and respond to inevitable exogenous influences. And then Michael Mason, who used to be the director of the Smithsonian's Center for Folklore and Cultural Heritage. Yeah, I worked there for 2 years. I can't even remember. And Roy Turner, who runs a Master's in Cultural Sustainability program in the United States in Goucher College, wrote an article suggesting that rather than trying to preserve a specific traditional expression, preservation suggesting sort of reification and ossification, or becoming more like keeping something still in time. Um, they suggest, and instead of looking at a specific traditional expression at the item level, cultural sustainability needs to engage the whole and cultural ecosystem. So a similar idea, looking at whole cultural strategies, the whole system and its current actors. But they're a little bit, both of these works are a little bit wishy-washy on the hows. Like, how's this going to be done? And so it's sort of like an orientation at the moment. And especially this question of how do we do it in authoritarian contexts? A lot of our research is being done in democratic countries, even where it's being done with indigenous peoples. The spaces for expression are very different than what we're seeing in more authoritarian contexts. And so that's sort of where this discussion of Jyanak Mani comes in. So, um, evolution of carving and worship at Jyanak Mani. So the Jyanak Mani, this site that I was talking about, and that had been, or that I'm focusing on for today. And I'm sorry, this is not the most interesting research from the last 6 months, but because I've been going there for 12 years, I can talk about it most. It was established in 1715 by the first Jyanak Rinpoche, who's not from this village. He's from a nearby area called Chamdo. Jyanak literally in Tibetan means China. So, I mean, this is a guy who sort of traveled around Tibet and China and sort of got his name as Jyanak Rinpoche because of that. And he settled in the Yushu area at the end of his travels. And the reincarnation lineage of the Jyanak Rinpoche still is sort of based out of Gyeko Monastery in the Yushu area. In the 300 years that have passed since it was first, since people started, what's the word I'm thinking about? Since this site was established, people have been stones and adding to the stones. It has played a really important part in the village economy. For a long time, villagers carved, and then at important moments, a lot of times you would have pastoralists who would descend on the village, and it was an important thing. These pastoralists would trade livestock or butter or important foodstuffs in exchange for stones that they could add to the pile, because adding to the pile was conceived as an act of religious merit, of generating religious merit. And so it sort of it played an important part in the life of the region and also in the village. This faced some difficulties during the Maoist period, during the Cultural Revolution between 1966 and 1976. And this is not limited to Tibet. This across China, there was sort of a campaign against the four olds, old thoughts, old culture, old traditions, something else. But in this period, what ended up happening is that stones were taken away from the site and used to build walls, which is what we're seeing here. And sometimes they were used to build outhouses. These are acts that really sort of defile these holy stones. And a meat processing factory, an abattoir, was built on the site of the original Jyanak Mani. So, I mean, which again, if you think about the Tibetan Buddhist context, the fact that so many sentient beings, so many beings were slaughtered in the spot of this holy site, can be seen as sort of a direct sort of upending of traditional ideas about the purity of the space, and really something defiling. And I mean, in some ways that sort of continued for a long time until in 2010 there was a massive earthquake. And I mean, horrible earthquake, horrible tragedy, lost their lives. It basically, I mean, it was 7.3 on the Richter scale, I think. It basically leveled the entire prefecture. But one of the things that's very interesting is that out of it, many of these walls were torn down as part of the rebuilding process, and stones were repatriated to the pile, which had begun to be worshipped again and had been rebuilt following the Cultural Revolution. So And one of the things that was interesting, my first trip was in 2011, so a year after the it's about a year and a half after the original earthquake, and the reconstruction of Yushu Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture was ongoing at this point. And one of the things that you started seeing people moving stones to this to the pile, but you also saw that people were not just walking around the pile of stones that had been sort of built up after the Cultural Revolution. Instead, they were circumambulating. They were walking around as a religious practice the entirety of the village, because the theory was that there are stones in all these houses and all these buildings in the village, and so there is merit not just in walking around the stones, the pile that is there, but in the entire village. People don't do that anymore because now all those walls have been knocked down, all the stones have been repatriated, or most have been repatriated, and so now people just walk around the sort of the pile itself. So I mean, there's this sort of uh, changing practice of how you circumambulate, but it's all within these cultural ideas of um, what is appropriate acts of or what are the values and what is the appropriate practice of religion. This is what the pile looks like now. I mean, it's this enormous. I mean, this is, I love this photo because it sort of gives you an idea. This is, I mean, it's about what, it's incredibly tall. It takes up, it's about, I think it's about a kilometer around to walk around the perimeter. It is a massive pile. Um, People will set out stones on the corner of the pile or on the outskirts of the pile, and some people will walk around those seller. They're trying to sell stones, so they're showing their wares, and some people will walk around the unsold stones as well. That's a personal preference. Um, but this continues apace into the present. And so one of the things that is interesting to me is sort of why this happens into the present. And I think one of the big things is because it fits into this broader set of cultural logics. Um, First of all, why do people carve the stones? And part of it is linked to the importance of writing, the power of writing and of language in Tibetan culture, which is seen to that the words you use in speech are seen to generate auspicious circumstances. The technology of writing is often linked to the practice of religion, excuse me, and and just about every surface that you can imagine can be written on for some purpose. So you'll have stones carved. They have prayer flags, which are put in windy places and wells. It's like chanting the prayers. You have prayer wheels, which you see back here. And people will and they inside them they have scriptures, and people will spin them as part of their religious practice as well, which relates to ideas of the Buddha turning the wheel of the Dharma, and so it's sort of part of this continued religious practice. Writing is seen in many cases as being sort of inherently sort of a different level of thing, because so many written texts traditionally were religious texts. And so books in general, and particularly religious texts, are not to be placed on the ground. They're to be placed in high places. They are supposed to be, um, you should not step on or over them because that is seen as a defiling act. And so if all these things you see, people will have solar powered prayer wheels which will spin on their dashboards of their cars with solar power. I had no idea what's happening. People hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Don't know what happened.
Jeez. No, I think
Oh,
my computer decided to lose the internet.
oh no.
So I am
You're
now
back
on
with
the
us now.
internet. Yes, I had to connect through my phone. Apologies.
That's okay.
I was just getting warmed up.
Yeah. So were we.
All
Okay.
right. So, let's see. Yeah, so I was, yeah, so there are taboos associated with the technology of writing, I think was what I
Yeah.
was saying.
Can you? Sorry, Tim. Can you reshare your screen?
Mhm.
Oh, unless it's something that I've done. No, you're up. You're fine. You're fine.
All
Yeah.
right.
Carry on. You're fine.
All right. Yeah, so there are all these taboos associated with writing and any surface that can be used for religious practice or any medium that can often is. And for writing can be taken. So people in Yushu will carve into cliff sides and they will carve or they will uh, print they will put sand on ice to write things and all sorts of different ways of including this as part of religious practice. Um, Another part of the religious practice, though, is then walking around. Once you have these objects, um, you can circumambulate them. Is the word that often gets used in English, and so people will walk around the holy sites, and they will do so in the Buddhist tradition in a clockwise fashion, always keeping the holy site on their right. And so it will you'll have people, and sometimes not just walking. What you see here is you see somebody prostrating around. So what they'll do is they'll prostrate down onto their stomach, put their head on the ground, then stand back up, take 2 steps, and then do so again, or maybe 3 steps. I mean, people are, it's not, to my knowledge, there's no necessary requirement. I've seen some people take as many as 5 as they get older, but the key is like these are various forms of incorporating religious texts into people's practice, not just through the reading of them, but also through carrying them around. So actually, a physical text. This is in a different area. It's not in YouTube, but in some areas, in some farming areas, they will carry these texts around their fields. They're seen to have, and doing so is seen to have a efficacy for preventing disasters in the community. And all of this is done. It sort of ties to these uh, these Buddhist ideas of what many call, or what some scholars have called, economies of fortune, where there are different sort of ways of generating fortune or of losing fortune. These are constantly being managed and constantly being addressed, and sort of people are constantly, in many cases, paying attention to uh, ways to make sure that they are preserving the auspicious circumstances of their uh, of their community and of their place and of their own lives, their families, and themselves. In Sensei, and not just in Sensei, in many parts of Tibet, people will be carving stones. Traditionally, it was carving by hand, and they would carve in this site. I mean, money stones. It's short for the 6-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum. Not just once on a stone, but you can do. This is supposed to be 100 mani on a stone. And what you see here is this little bits of red are supposed to be thumbprints where they've counted the number of mani that are carved on the stone. And the more times, the more merit that could be generated from that stone, theoretically. And people will be more likely to, or it might fetch a higher price, rather. It's not just the 6-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara. You have other mantras that can be carved into stone. So this is Om Badzakara Pema Sita Hum, which is the mantra of, I believe, Guru Rinpoche, of the sort of one of the people who brought Buddhism to Tibet. You also have stones of different sizes. So little stones, but these are much larger than the size of a person. The idea is that buying a larger stone generates, or a set of stones generates more merit again. And people will carve on all surfaces of a stone. Not limited to stone, they'll do it on pool tables as well. Or on the skulls of yaks, even. Another kind of stone that gets sold at Jyanak Mani is called Kabja Mani. And Kabja means 100 ka. Ka is the Tibetan word for mouth. And the idea is that they carve this word ka 100 times. These stones don't get placed on the pile. They get placed on bridges or roadways, places where people pass a lot, and it's supposed to have some sort of almost sort of a sympathetic magic approach where it sort of protects people from malicious gossip. So, what I've done so far is I've tried to sketch out this idea of Jyanak Mani as a place where it's tied in deeply to certain values, that the practice of carving is tied into a number of values that remain important in Tibetan life. But I've also talked about how the pile itself and the practice has changed at different moments. And one thing I noticed on this trip is it has changed a lot in different ways. Firstly, there are different stones being used. When it was first established, the founder designated a particular quarry on the mountain that is opposite the village, on the opposite side of the river from the village, and said, this is the place where stones have to be collected. And they were all white stones. And you see now, like, people will sometimes carve on stones that are not white in color. One thing I found, I didn't think to bring one. The people now have realized that tourists like to buy stones. They like to buy small stones. They like the stones to be round. And so people will sometimes pick up stones from rivers and carve them because the river stones are seen to be rounder and they're therefore more pleasing to a tourist purchaser. And sometimes they'll carve those. I've already shown you that people will carve just about anything if they can, and including billiards tables. But one of the most interesting things from this last trip is that people are now carving on perfectly flat stones. And these perfectly flat stones are not actually from the originally designated quarry. People are not allowed to use that quarry anymore. The government has said that in the name of ecological conservation, they are not to use that quarry for stones anymore. Which creates an interesting sort of dilemma. And so what people have done in the name of ecological conservation is they have imported stones from another province where they are allowed to quarry those stones. And I'm not sure how that makes up for the emissions and all the other things, but these are the rules. And so people have these perfectly flat stones now, and actually buyers like them. They like it when the stones are perfectly flat and uniform like this. There are also new economics and new demographics in play. Many of the carvers, the people who carve now, are from outside the community. Since the Yushu earthquake in 2010, people have increasingly decided, you know what, that was hard work. I'm not going to do that so much. A lot of younger people are not interested in doing that. And so a lot of the people who are carving now are from Cheondo Prefecture, which is sort of the next prefecture over in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, or Xizang Autonomous Region, as people say, and that's now be called. So these carvers are coming from outside the community. I also met some carvers who are from another province. This is one change that's happening. You also, and it's fueled also by a booming real estate market. So a lot of the people who are from this village have realized that they can make a lot more money renting out space or building up a hotel or things like that than they could by carving stones. And so the changing market economics have discouraged some people from the village from continuing to carve stones in the village. Another thing is that the costs of or there are costs associated with where you sell your stones from. If you're a carver, if you maintain that practice, if you can rent a shop front for a couple $100 a month, which in local terms, a few thousand renminbi is a decent amount of money, or you can rent a spot sort of on the ground, either inside the pile or on the outskirts of the pile, and that will also cost you a little bit of money, and you have to make that up with your sales basically. And so these economics are shaping the practices and the preferences of many carvers. The need to absolutely sell a certain amount to make ends meet is also encouraging people to use new technologies, new tools. So this one, I think I showed a picture earlier. This is the final product of this woman doing the hand carving, but she doesn't actually do that much anymore. That was basically done so that I could take some pictures and videos of it. What she usually uses is she uses sort of a Dremel tool, which gets used to carve. And actually, many people prefer this. The carvers themselves do. They can get through things a lot quicker when they use the Dremel tool. This is also actually currently considered hand carving because people are still using their hands to control the tool. There's a new kind of carving that is even more advanced. That is really different. People are using lasers to carve. Now, I've heard different opinions about the laser carving. Laser carving has been some people really like it. I've heard a lot of people say that buyers really prefer this because the appearance of the Tibetan language is really nice. But I've heard other people say that the carving is actually, it doesn't etch very deep. It's etching. It's not sort of proper carving. And so actually after a couple of years, it will just wear off due to the elements. But this is becoming really popular as sort of the carving with lasers. And I've actually heard some other mixed reviews. Like I think a lot of Tibetans would actually have some problems with the way this is written, or more conservative Tibetans might have some problems with the way that this is written. Instead of writing top to bottom, left to right, as Tibetan is normally written, or left to right and top to bottom rather. This is starting from the bottom, and sometimes it goes right to left, and sometimes and I mean these just very unusual and new ways of writing the Tibetan language, and it seems to me that this could come up against many values that many more conservative Tibetans hold. At the same time, people do prefer these; they sell better, and this guy here in the left hand picture, he can carve a couple hundred of these every day. I mean, not carve. He can have carved a couple hundred of these every day, and it costs him a lot less, and he can sell it for more than the average hand carved stone. So, I mean, there are all these changes to the practices of carving that are going on, leading to something like this. Now, these new carving technologies and practices have led to some concerns. The local government has recently decided that this tradition, that the carving itself is heritage, and it hasn't moved high up the heritage food chain yet, but they have been sponsoring competitions for people to hand carve. The lady I showed earlier, let's see if I can bring it back. It was way at the beginning. This lady she got second place in the recent competition, and her husband got first place. And there are cash prizes if you win. But these competitions and recognitions are coming up against strong headwinds with buyers, or with the preferences of buyers who prefer the laser etched stones. And they're coming up also against the fact that even those who can win the hand carving competitions don't actually prefer hand carving. So there's, I mean, what we're having sort of these changes to the tradition. But at the same time, what you see is every day you see people walking around the stones, circumambulating the stones, buying stones and adding them to the pile. And so, and on the 15th and the 18th of the lunar month, these important days of the lunar month that are seen to be more auspicious, people will be especially many. And morning until night, you'll have people walking around. People who live in the village will walk around the stones. When children are naughty, they might be asked to run a lap around the stones. All of these different the walking around, the religious practice is deeply embedded in the region's culture and cultural attitudes and practices. And so it all begs the question, to me at least, what is being sustained and how does it, like when we think about cultural sustainability, a lot of it is based on sort of thinking about what we need to sustain. We need to sustain the tradition. Well, what tradition is being sustained? If you're thinking about the tradition of carving stones, even heritage recognition is going to struggle with that because there are such strong headwinds both among the carvers themselves who prefer not to do it, and with and many of whom are no longer carving at all, and with the purchasers who prefer stones that are being laser etched. But at the same time, we could say that the practice of buying stones, the values that motivate the practice of buying stones and walking around the money pile seem to be very vital indeed. So rather than thinking about sort of individual forms, or even these sort of whole systems approaches, we need to sort of think about sort of what is being sustained and how we assess it. Also, what about the sustainability of epistemologies or ways of knowing, right? Because that seems to be what is really being sustained at this site. It's not just, there's sort of a linguistic element, maybe, there's a cultural element, maybe, but it's really this sort of way of knowing and way of understanding and interacting with the world that seems to be actually in many ways very vital, and or at least for the moment. And so maybe that's something that, again, like thinking about the questions that we're asking rather than the answers that I'm providing. Like, how do we assess this sustainability? What is being sustained and what is not being sustained, and what is actually important with that? And then also finally, what does heritage sustainability or cultural sustainability look like in authoritarian contexts? I don't have an image of it, but in late December of 2023, there was supposed to be a exhibition of money stones, and in the nearby prefecture seat, and this was actually shut down because the local government sort of was concerned by the sheer number of people who were coming out to attend this exhibition, and even though it had sort of permissions ahead of time. And so in an authoritarian context, like what is practicable and practical can change very quickly. And even a display or an exhibition can soon be shut down. And so we have to sort of continue thinking about what does cultural sustainability look like in authoritarian contexts? And these are sort of the questions that I'm coming to at the moment with the examination of this site and this set of practices. I think that's a lot of my time, so I'll stop here. Thank you all. And I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got them, or here's a list of further reading in case anybody's interested.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was absolutely fascinating.